everybody for joining. Today's a very important meeting, but it's also it can be boring when you talk about legal stuff, but it's so important that I encourage you to not be bored by it and take the importance from it. So anyway, Seth Goodstein is here with ROI Law Firm, he is we're going to talk a little bit about new landlord tenant laws and how that affects us all as real estate agents. Because obviously we don't do property management, but landlord tenant laws can still affect a real estate transaction. So anyways, we're going to talk about that. And after the meeting, if you want to learn some more about it, / be scared more, I'm going to send a video from, I forget her name, but the attorney who does all the videos for the Association of Realtors. She did a great video that she covered all this in it's like a 2-hour video. And she covers all this and more, but we're going to kind of condense that a little bit and talk about it and go from there. So yeah, again, this is Seth Goodstein, ROI Law Firm, and we'll also include his information if you guys have any questions and you want to refer them. So we have 5 bullet points today. First bullet point, I feel like I always start out these meetings with this, and that's stay in your lane as a real estate broker. Don't give advice on something that you are not an expert in. And I think I speak for all 54 of our real estate brokers. None of us are experts in property management. In fact, as Seth pointed out to me when we were kind of prepping for this, he gets called all the time from property managers who all they do is property management, saying like, hey, what does this mean in the new landlord tenant laws? So even property managers have to be careful advising on landlord tenant laws. So I think that's almost all encompassing of what we're about to talk about is don't advise on something that you don't work in every day, right? Landlord tenant laws are very different from real estate sales. So that's really the first point. Number 2, I'm going to get that.
Oh, sure. Well, I guess, so I've been practicing in, one area is landlord tenant law for about 10 years. And it used to be a lot more forgiving when you had occupants. There were ways to get rid of people reliably in 3, 10, or maybe 20 days. But those have all disappeared in the last 3 years or so. And I think that it's almost a premise of this discussion that you shouldn't be advising people on how to deal with occupants and property. So I'd rather just kind of go through some scenarios where you might accidentally come across landlord tenant laws and maybe not realize it. And then just recognize those scenarios and seek professional help at that point. But what's changed in the last 2 years is in 2018, the legislature passed a bunch of laws that took away a 3-day pay or vacate notice for payment of non-rent and set forth a 90-day repayment program, even if you were to prevail in that sort of case. And they took the 3-day notice and made it into a 14-day notice. So basically they took what was once about a 3-week process and made it about 4 or 5 months. So that was kind of the new baseline that landlords could expect in dealing with their most common eviction, which is non-payment.
Just to clarify, you're saying that you used to be able to evict a tenant if they were within 3 days, and now it's gone to 4 months for non-payment?
Well,
it's like
probably
pretty
4 or
dramatic
5.
difference.
Yeah, and now even more actually. We'll talk about that in a couple bullet points. So then obviously with the COVID pandemic, there were a variety of local, state, and federal moratoriums on evictions, and those created eviction timelines and guidelines that applied to everybody, not just people that didn't pay their rent. So that was another erosion of landlord property rights. And then this year, well, in 2021, last year, I suppose, the legislature actually expanded on a lot of the timeframes in the moratoriums. And now what we're looking at is timeframes typically, it's nominally called a 90 and 120-day notice to get rid of people. for so-called just causes, like moving into a property, selling a property, remodeling a property. But those are just like the minimum amounts of notices. They're tied to a rental period. So if your rent's due on the 1st and you're like, I would like to get rid of my tenants, and it's the 10th of the month, you have to count, say, 90 days in advance. And that would be, let's say, April 10th if you were doing that. Well, April 4th, I suppose, if you were looking 90 days into the future. But that's not the rent due date. So then whatever notice would need to say April 30th. So it's really more like 120 days. So there's kind of a day counting exercise that goes on. So really you can add up to 30 days to any of these minimum notice timeframes. And what we're thinking about, you guys seeing, is probably people wanting to move into properties, people wanting to sell properties, or people buying properties for remodeling. So we're really thinking about 90 and 120 day notice periods here, which can then pretty easily be bumped up, a further 30 days because of day counting. So I thought of 4 scenarios where you might accidentally become a landlord here, and then, or not you, but your clients could become landlords and subject to all of these kind of thorny regulations. One that the NWMLS legal hotline, as Isaac said, did a really lengthy presentation on was what you would call delay occupancy, meaning someone wants to move into a house, but the owner wants to stay in it for whatever amount of time. So as real estate agents, you have to follow the forms, and the form for that actually takes the form of a lease, like a full-blown lease. It's Form 65B. And if you sign one of those and people want to stay for an extra week or something, you have inadvertently become a landlord, and then when the people don't leave, you kind of swept up in some unintended consequences and subject to all those lengthy notice requirements. There may be some workarounds to those, but that shouldn't be counted on. And so I think if someone wants to do a delayed occupancy, the advice is don't do it and get, that would be my advice, but probably any attorney's advice, because it's just, you get yourself into a situation, and I've actually had this come across my desk, where the people don't leave. Like I saw this in the situation where a lady was facing foreclosure and sold her house on the eve of sale, didn't realize too much cash, and didn't really feel that committed to the transaction as a result. And we actually had to give her a 90-day notice while these poor people were paying the mortgage on the house they were supposed to be moving out of, and the mortgage on their new house that this lady was sitting in, and then paying me to evict them. So that all went on for months. That was really unfortunate.
Can I step in and say something?
Yeah.
Seth has been saying this to me for about 6 months, maybe longer. He's been saying, like, you guys should not be doing delayed occupancy. Like, you really shouldn't be doing it. I'm like, all right, Seth, you're an attorney, like, of course, sure, whatever. Like, I got it. Then I watched this video and I sent it to Seth. I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's like, I've literally been saying this to you for 6 months. And he's like, I've already seen the video. So I just want to say, if you guys are like, okay, he's an attorney, I've been there for forever. I've been like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. You really should watch this video, but I do want to repeat just some of the things he said. For the record, whether or not you have a 65B, which is the form you should use if you have a delayed occupancy, if you, like a lot of people do, like +1 day or +2 days, regardless, doesn't matter. Once it closes, if they're still occupying the property, they are a tenant and you are a landlord, okay? And they are subject to tenant rights. And so what that means is everything we kind of glossed over, and again, if you want to watch the video, it really goes into depth about you need to give them a 90-day notice. Here's a really scary one. There's now in Washington, and I'm speaking out of turn now, so please, I'm not an attorney, so please correct me if I say something incorrect. But there's now no, you need just cause, there's no just cause evictions, meaning you can't just evict somebody for no reason. So if someone's not paying rent, then the 90 days apply, right? If you're going to remodel a home, that's again asterisks, there's more details of that, then you can give someone notice that you're going to terminate the lease agreement. There are reasons, but if they're paying the rent agreement that you agreed to on the 65B, there are cases where you maybe literally can't get them out of the home, period. Like there's no, like they're being a good tenant, so they can stay in the home. I'm paraphrasing and really oversimplifying, but that's like, that was probably the biggest takeaway for me, is the fact that like, not only is this like a time thing and money paying an attorney to evict someone, you could even literally get to a point where it's like, no, you can't get in the home. They have tenant rights and you literally cannot.
The 65B has a date ending, like.
Yeah, do you want to talk about just cause evictions? Yeah.
Maybe several things there.
And is it Annie Fitzgerald?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, she does good videos.
Great videos. Yeah, no, I will include this. Rachel will. I don't do anything. Rachel will include this in the recap video. And again, you don't have to watch it, by the way. It's a video. You can just listen to it as you drive. It's just the content that you hear is phenomenal.
Okay, so 3 things that prompted me to talk about it is I mentioned this used to be a lot more forgiving. And what I mean by that is you used to have what was called no cause termination, where you could give someone 20 days of notice to leave for any reason at all. You don't have to give a reason. So if someone didn't leave at the end of their 65B, you could give them a 20-day notice, but more likely, it used to be if you held over past the expiration of the lease date, you could just be evicted without any notice, but that's gone. Now, and this is very difficult to explain, but I'll try. If you let someone onto a property for at least 6 months, but less than 12 months, and you give them a no cause termination notice 60 days before the expiration of the 6 to 12 month lease, then you can do your 60-day no cause termination. But if you got like a 65B for 2 weeks, that's not 6 months. There's no 60 days to give them the notice. So that lease does not end by its own terms. And then they become a monthly tenant, subject to these, 90 and 120 day just cause evictions, which again are probably more than 90 and 120 days. And another point is that they don't pay their rent under the 65B. This really wasn't a central topic of this discussion, but non-rental evictions take forever right now because you have to offer them a repayment. They have to default on the repayment, which would probably take about 30 days for that to occur. There's a pre-filing mediation program that takes 14 days in theory, but in practice takes closer to about 3 to 4 weeks to get whatever certification you need from the mediator. And then you can take them to the eviction court, which thanks to the 2008 rules can be up to a 4-month process itself. So it's a lot cleaner to just terminate people based upon the passage of days at this point. Okay, so that's the lease back. And
we are going to talk about solutions, by the way, at the end. Like we have some, yeah, this is all doom and gloom. There are some options here. We're just talking about, and I also want to say, you don't have to remember everything he's saying about like, oh, 60 days, 90, and then if you do it this way, and you had to fish for lunch, it's different. It's not like, you don't have to remember all that. All you have to remember is it's really complicated, talk to an attorney, and then at the end, we'll talk about solutions.
So the next one is, okay, and I actually talked about this in a meeting, I think last summer, getting rid of occupants so you can list a house. Again, you get into these really complicated notices, and the MLS attorney, Annie, commented that there's only a very few number of attorneys left in the whole state that are really competent to be doing this sort of stuff. That's attorneys. And then as I was saying, property managers call me all the time. And I have multiple cases on my desk right now where property managers screwed this up and we're having to renotice people. And the clients are not too happy about that, understandably. So if someone wants to get rid of occupants so you can list a house, please refer those people to an attorney to do that. Because what happens is when you screw one of these up, it's probably more of a win, not a myth, unfortunately. you really reset the clock on whatever transaction they had planned. Like if you get to the end of a 90-day notice that wasn't served right, for example, in the case I'm doing right now, and you're like, well, gee, I can't take action on this. So now we have to restart the 90 days and we get into that day counting thing. So it's really more of like 120 days. So that takes you from, like, these people wanted to do a 1031 and invest in another state. And you're not gonna be able to do that for like 4 or 5 months further at this point. Now we're gonna try some workarounds in that case, obviously, but that can't really be counted on.
So again, if we were doing a flow chart, it would be, if somebody wants to get a tenant out to sell a home, again, see bullet point 1, talk to an attorney. Again, it's really that's why bullet point 1 was like the most important, that's all encompassing. It's just, that's not, unless you have a bunch of real estate that you manage yourself and you really know it, please talk to me if that is the case, but talk to an attorney. It's way too serious. And there's one other thing, like, number 1, it can set the clock if you do it wrong and you have to start all over again. But number 2, if they do get out, even though you did it wrong, there are, I don't know what the proper term is, but attorney sharks who are out there looking for tenants who were wrongly kicked out and saying, I can represent you and make you some money. And then they talk about this again in the video, so we don't have to talk about the damages that you could be responsible for, but it's a ton. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like 4.5 times a month that are in attorney's fees. So I mean, consider that a $10,000 to $20,000 lesson.
So if you advise a seller, oh, just do this, give them this notice, and you were wrong, and that happens, guess who the seller's coming after? It's you, right?
So to me, this topic is, I know that the MLS released a terrifying video about the delayed occupancy recently, but actually this topic about real estate agents giving notice to the tenants comes up a lot more in my experience. I've seen this probably 10 times in the last year, and I've seen the delayed occupancy thing once. And I think that's a symptom of most people are invested enough in these transactions to do the right thing and get out. But again, that's hoping for the best and not planning for the worst. But these notices are a real minefield, and they used to be a lot simpler than they were. So
can I be clear what you're saying? What he's talking about is where you're buying a property in which there are tenants and the tenants are supposed to vacate before closing. Is that what you're saying? Okay,
right.
sorry, I just want to be clear what he's referring to. So now we're not talking about delayed occupancy anymore. We're talking about that where you're pending on a property and the tenants are supposed to vacate before closing. And now you can.
That's another thing we're going to bring up in this bullet point is, what are tenants? Tenants aren't just people that like have a lease and they're supposed to pay money. Tenant could be treated as like, let's say the homeowner died and their adult children living in the home and won't leave, or maybe even someone is squatting or was let onto the property by another occupant that was legitimately there. So tenants aren't just what you would consider a tenant in colloquial terms. The definition is more broad. So I think that's that topic. I think that's the most dangerous one myself, and I think it's the one that you can most really pin on a real estate broker, because maybe there's some contributory, wrongdoing by other people in this in back, and a breach of the duty of good faith by the person that's not leaving. But the improperly filled out or served or both notice to vacate is more concerning to me, actually, if I'm a real estate agent.
So I think before we actually continue, I think we should talk about solutions on that one, because the solutions for this one is very specific to this problem. Solutions are, and again, please interrupt me if I say something right.
Yeah.
Solutions on this one, if you're representing the seller and there are tenants, or again, let's just say occupancy. I wrote tenants when we were talking about this, but he said, no, it should say occupants, because tenants makes you think of something different. It's really occupants who don't own the home. If you are listing the property, you should very clearly write in the occupancy portion on the listing input, subject to tenant rights. That's really important. And then when it's occupancy on the Form 21, we're going to talk about that a little bit more, actually. We got some Form 21s here, just so everyone knows what we're talking about. But when you're getting offers, if they don't say this, when they submit an offer, then counter this, you're going to say on the occupancy, subject to tenant rights. That way, if the tenant doesn't vacate as they agreed to, if you've gone through all the right process and 9 days are up and they're supposed to vacate and they don't, the buyer can't sue the seller that allows specific performance for not providing a vacant home, because like, well, we told you it's subject to tenant rights. So there's nothing we can, so that was right kind of close. Did that, like, did that all properly?
Well, I think it's important to say it's subject to tenant rights, yeah. I don't think you see specific performance come up in this instance too often. Yeah, back end remarks are easy to write, and as you'll see, easy to incorporate on Form 21, and we'll give you some advice on it too.
And then as a buyer's agent, yeah.
What are you allowed to ask? Are we allowed to see a contract? Like, we're just like hoping that they have an agreement and they're gonna honor it. I mean, are we allowed to know what they're?
I think we're getting to that.
Okay.
Isaac,
Yes.
your phone turned off, Lovey. I can't.
All right,
see.
someone's calling me. Let me see.
There you go. Hello.
Is that back? Okay, cool.
Hi, Seth.
Hello. Okay, perfect. Well, so we're gonna talk about the buyer, what happens on the buyer side.
Okay.
Okay.
So bullet point 3 is actually called buying a property in which the occupants are supposed to leave before or around closing. So we see this sometime in actually public facing remarks and listings that, you know, occupied until next month, or tenants plan to move out, or tenants will move out, or something like that. And as we said, that's really not enforceable without more. If you encounter that, I think that if I was a real estate agent, I would have an attorney review the circumstances. And what an attorney would probably be looking for is release agreements, notices that have been provided, proofs of service of those notices. And then they could help kind of assess the likelihood of these people being able to be removed if they don't leave as advertised. And if a buyer does purchase a property with occupants in it, the way that landlord-tenant laws work in Washington is they are non-waivable, and there's, you know, probably about 60 to 100 provisions of landlord-tenant law that apply to every tenancy. And so you inherit all these landlord duties when you take on an occupied property, even if it's not your intent to be anyone's landlord and you need to move in within 60 days or something under your loan. But some of those would include the security deposit needs to be transferred and accounted for. There's a notice of new ownership every time a rental property changes hands. There's often local business licenses. You have to maintain the property. You need to get landlord dwelling insurance, because if they burn your house down and it's a homeowner's policy, you could get your claim denied. All considerations that I think an attorney would, or a competent attorney would go through with the buyers. So I think that addresses that.
I guess
to a
the
point.
biggest thing to protect your buyer would just maybe find out the date on which they're supposed to leave and don't have your closing date be until after that.
We're gonna get
But
to
they're
that
gone.
too, actually, with the
Sorry.
421 thing.
After that,
So,
I just try to avoid these like.
No, I agree.
sketchy
Yeah.
situations.
so a couple of things. So first off, if you are representing a buyer who is expecting to inherit tenants, use it Form 22L. It's the lease review addendum. And it says that the seller is required to, I think within 10 days, don't quote me on timelines, but within 10 days, they're required to give you everything pertaining to the tenant in the lease. I would also use a tenant estoppel, which requires the tenant to, and please correct me if I say something wrong, which requires the tenant to confirm what the landlord is saying, right? Because if the landlord says, yeah, the lease is $2,000 a month, and the tenant says, no, I've been paying $1,000 a month for the past 2 years, you want to confirm that, right? So you can have proper contingencies in place. If you're ever going through something like that, maybe just talk to me on the first one. I can help you through it. I don't think that's so much, that's less common. Well, it's pretty rare that you have a buyer who is planning on inheriting the tenant. But yeah, I'd say let's just stop on that one for now. Talk to me if you are going to do that, and I can help you through that. If you are not planning on inheriting a tenant, and I guess we didn't actually prep this part, so I'm asking you, isn't it as simple as saying on a addendum that this is contingent on the property being vacated?
Well, I think that would come down to the Form 21 discussion.
Okay, so let's just go to that then.
Well, one more
Oh, yeah, sorry.
bullet point here. We kind of went over this almost already. It's buying a property where you're accepting tenants. So sometimes, if a property is sold under the premise that it's an investment property, or, it's got like a rented out mother-in-law or something, and that was part of the deal. And then for whatever reason, that tenant leaves during the pendency of the sale. You would want to watch out about having a seller put a tenant back in the property at the 11th hour, because they're probably not motivated to underwrite that person very well. So
How do you protect yourself from that?
well, I think if you get an estoppel certificate, which is also called like an adjournment sometimes, where the people say, I am the occupant, here's what I'm paying, that becomes part of the deal. And then that circumstance changes, then that would be a material breach of the purchase and sale agreement, and you could go back to the negotiating table or walk away or something.
Got it.
Or I guess if they didn't perform, you might have a cause for damages against the seller. Okay, so I wanted to move on to the 121.
We all know this form, but just so we know exactly.
This is something that we need.
So for people who aren't here, we're just hanging out the front page of Form 21, if you want to pull that up. This is,
So everybody understands exactly what to do, right? And everybody's mind was full after about 7 seconds, as mine was as well, in 22 years of business. So I have Seth's contact information by phone. Call Seth. That's the answer. Just call Seth.
Or call somebody.
Or call.
yeah, I mean, obviously, Seth is a tenant at our office. Craig and I use Seth for personal matters. You can use any real estate attorney, but do use a real estate attorney, not some personal injury attorney who says, yeah, I've done an eviction before. So.
I definitely need to get your part before they, I have an investor that has a lot of tenants, and he wants to start selling the property. And I'm like, I'm not even gonna advise you, but I'll find you.
Yeah, definitely
Because I'm not.
highly recommend Seth.
Okay, so I want to point out paragraph 11. This is, I think, a very innocuous paragraph that I see filled out incorrectly basically every time one of these comes across my desk. Yeah, so
Thank you,
closing dates are
Isaac.
pretty obvious. We all know what a closing date is. Possession date is what I want to talk about. So what is possession of property? It means that you get to enjoy the full beneficial use of the property. And evictions only deal with possession. Usually that means people like are staying in your property, but in some cases where the people are like hoarders or something, and you can't throw all of their possessions on the front sidewalk in a 1-hour sheriff's appointment, then the possessions become so impractical that you're deprived of possession of the property. So basically we're talking about where are the people here. And I want to go back through the bullet points and discuss kind of how this could be filled out in these situations. So the delayed occupancy. So if you are doing a lease back, is the possession date on closing?
No.
No. So you might say other, maybe see Form 65B. So the eviction that I did where someone actually wouldn't leave a house they sold, it said possession was on closing, and this form was not as helpful as it could have been. Okay, 2, getting rid of occupants or tenants so you can list a house. So this one, hopefully you've consulted an attorney months ago before it gets to a PSA, mutual acceptance, and you've got a vacate date that was properly served. Let's say they're supposed to vacate on January 31st, but they're still there. So, and let's say the closing date is January 31st. What's your possession date? Well, we don't know if these people are gonna leave. So you could play this one of two ways. If I'm the buyer, I probably want the possession date to be on the 31st, because if the people are still there, I don't want to deal with that. But if I'm the seller, you might say other subject to tenant rights. And you could maybe have a Form 34 that says, here's our notice to vacate and proof of service. You need to find out with your own counsel what all this means.
That's what a smart listing broker would do. They would change it to subject to tenant rights. If you represent the buyer and this is subject to tenant rights, just be very clear that this means if you don't get occupancy at closing, you can't be like, hey, we don't have occupancy, the tenant hasn't moved out, you can't back out of the contract.
So the way that I've always seen this done wrong is, this is almost an afterthought and everybody says on closing. So if you're representing a buyer, and the sellers have sort of started out filling out this form, you might want to watch out for that. I think that's a really serious issue now. Okay, buying a property in which tenants are supposed to leave around closing. So you got a closing date, and then the tenants have been promised to leave whenever. So what is your possession date? Again, not closing, subject to tenant rights if you're the seller. Or it is the promised vacate date if you're the buyer.
So if you do represent the buyer though, and it is, the expectation is that the tenants will be out by the time of closing, I would not accept that from a seller, from a listing broker that says subject to tenant rights. I would say, no, you're saying that the tenant will be out. So by saying possession is at closing, wouldn't that be the proper thing to do when you're representing the buyer? Because then you're saying, if you can't provide possession at closing, then we can terminate, because like that is part of the agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I kind of stuttered through that. Does that make sense, what I said? Okay, cool.
Okay, so then buying a property in which you're accepting tenants, like an investment property. This is more of an interesting question because your intended enjoyment of this property is an investment property. So possession to you probably is having the tenants in there. So I would just say closing in that case. And then if you can either get help with this from Isaac or an attorney, or do this correctly on your own, you'll put your clients in a good position to not have to deal with a lot of these downfalls.
And if you ever want to know, like, is this something I need to talk to an attorney about? Feel free to call me first. And I'm not someone who's just always like, oh, don't ask me, ask an attorney. I'll try and work through it with you. I mean, I want to save your client's money too. If we can get through something without talking to an attorney, I'd love to do that. But there just are some things that it's like, I shouldn't be advising on it. You shouldn't be advising on it. Let's talk to an attorney.
Yeah, so I guess just don't check the at closing or on closing box in paragraph 11 without giving it some thought. Okay, so the last thing I was going to talk about is some potential consequences to real estate brokers, and we've already gone over some of these things. It's just like, if this doesn't get done right, the legislature has decided it's important for it to take forever to get rid of people out of houses, and you would be caught up in that. And I think that, you know, the time frames here is 4, 5, 6 months to deal with this stuff in the manner set forth in the law right now. And while that's going on, people are paying mortgages, people can't move into their houses, people are getting, you know, in default of occupancy requirements for federal mortgages. You have an inflamed occupant in the house that could be destructive. They become landlords unwittingly. So there's a lot of pitfalls here.
We can claim buyer, we can claim, you know, pain and suffering that they weren't able to enjoy Christmas in their house that they thought they would because you advised them incorrectly.
Yeah. So, and then what happens is eventually this lands on an attorney's desk. And even if you refer an attorney, and this is always a little bit of a sticking point, and this is something that's actually happened with me, is you get these people that aren't real happy, having been deprived of their property for however long. They're like, well, gee, how did this happen? And if you know, if you have an attorney-client relationship, you have to have your client's interest in mind, and you'd say, well, you know, it looks like your real estate agent did something they shouldn't have here. By the way, you may have a claim against them. I just have to tell you that because it's in your interest.
No, seriously, he has to tell the person you referred to him that, by the way, the person who referred me to you sucks, and you, no, I'm just kidding, but.
I mean, there's like people that are gonna burn the house down with, you know, their explanation of that, and there's people that would be a little more matter of fact. But I had a situation where a property management company, who will remain unnamed, said, how do we get rid of these people? And I said, oh, well, you give them, you know, a 60-day notice, and I should do it because I am an attorney and this is new and you might get it wrong. And I didn't hear anything back from them. And in 60 calendar days, I get this 60-day notice. They said, okay, start the eviction. They haven't left. And they did the day counting wrong that we discussed in the beginning, so it wasn't a valid notice. And I told them, look, I'm not gonna take this referral because although this is not a legal conflict, it's a moral one. And I'm just gonna have to tell on you to these property owners, I don't wanna do it. So go find another attorney. And I have enough business that that's kind of how I handle those things. But somebody else, you know, might take a referral and kind of burn you because they're, well, not burn you, but, you know, follow the ethical rules that would potentially result in throwing you under the bus, basically, maybe deservedly so. But that's, I think, your downfall is, you know, an attorney, you're going to lose control over the situation, and someone's going to tell them the truth about what happened, and you know, we're probably looking at tens of thousands of dollars of damage if any sort of occupancy's gone wrong. So, yeah.
Let's talk about solutions.
Yeah, let's do that.
Well,
There's really my first solution is really the best one, and that is talk to an attorney if you don't know what you're doing. But the second one is especially with the delayed occupancy. Again, I have 180 on this. If you asked me 30 days ago, I would have said totally different. I would have been like, it's fine. Like, you know, there's ways. I probably will not do delayed occupancy when representing a buyer all next year. And if I do, I'm working with Seth on a kind of a CYA disclosure that we're going to provide to all you guys. And I think we're going to actually put it in our policies and procedures that if you do a rent back where you represent the buyer, your buyer has to sign this. And it's saying, we told you not to do it. You still said you want to do it. So you're holding us harmless. We're working on that. I don't know exactly how that's going to look, but we're going to get that to you guys soon. So don't do it. But if they do it, make them say, yeah, you told me not to do it in writing. So we're getting that.
Well, prepping sellers, I mean, in the seller's market, the only thing they can't have, they shouldn't ask for or demand is the way closing, staying, or, you know, staying longer.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
They
it's
want their money, and then they want to fart around packing boxes and
Yeah.
nostalgic and stuff. That is not one of the seller perks that you can have right now. You can have everything else practically.
right. So there is one.
It will complicate things so bad.
Yeah, so there's one exception. Well, I'm not even going to say it's an exception. I still wouldn't do it. But there's one way that you could potentially do it that I still love, but it's an option. And that is an escrow holdback for like a security deposit. And
Put money in the can.
yeah, so okay, so the after all the expenses to the seller, their mortgage and everything, they're getting $100,000. And you say, okay, 20,000 is going to stay with escrow as a security deposit. You don't get it until you're out. We're also going to work on that addendum. Yeah, so we're also going to work on that addendum. That's a more difficult one, but we're hopefully going to have something like that we can put in a contract. So then, you know, you can say, don't do it, but if you are going to do it, hold me harmless. And also, seller, you know, wait, hold the security deposit. We won't require that. If you have a buyer who wants to hold us harmless, hold you harmless, and the brokerage harmless, and say, no, I'm willing to roll the dice. I mean, let's be honest here. The odds of this happening, the seller saying, are pretty slim, right? Like probably way less than 1%. But because of how big of a risk it is, you still want to be held harmless. So it's not unlikely a buyer will say, yeah, I'll hold you harmless. I'm still willing to roll the dice.
Because back when the market was like nutso, and we were talking about it last meeting of like weighing everything. mean, people were waiving everything, but that gave you a little power play if you were letting them have 45 extra days.
I probably helped 6 buyers this year that we used delayed
In a moment,
occupancy.
it helped you
Seriously.
win, right?
Oh
Like,
my gosh, all the time. So what Danielle is saying, like, this is like kind of crappy because that was a huge negotiating tool. And I've had buyers who are like, I don't care, they can occupy it for 60 days. I just want the damn house. And so it does really suck. So that's why we should have the security deposit. Because there are times where you have a seller who's like, no, I need extra time.
Money's the only thing that needs nostalgia and emotion.
So what they're saying, just in case you can't hear, is that like if you like people still want to use this, and so the way you do that is you have a security deposit, so then you can hold that over their head if they don't move out. Seth, did I talk out of turn at all? Do you?
Maybe a little bit.
Okay, so now Seth is going to correct me.
So a security deposit is a very specific thing, and that's not an escrow holdback, so you wouldn't call it a security deposit.
We gotta do the legal part.
Again, speak to an attorney.
And then a couple other things about escrow holdbacks. This is actually a really common tool in like the wholesaling and investor space, where people have distressed properties and again, aren't going to realize a lot of cash from selling their property and are more likely not to leave. So escrow holdbacks have been going on in that space all along. And what I've learned is that in this day and age, for an average house, even if about a $20,000 or $30,000 escrow holdback is really going to break your buyer even if they have to go through all these processes because someone breaches their rent back. And I know that's a pretty eye-popping sum of money, but what you think about is, so you've been paying a mortgage on this for a couple months, and then you need to pay the mortgage on it for another 4 months, and you need to pay an attorney probably $2,000 to $4,000 to get rid of the folks. And then your stuff's all in storage and you're in storage. That adds up pretty fast. I mean, you know, just the carrying charges of the property for 6 to 8 months is probably like, I don't know, $24,000 on an average house. And then the legal fees is probably like $4,000, and then renting another house, maybe that's another $24,000. So these holdbacks go fast.
And if you're the seller and we're talking about a 3-4 week rent back, who cares? You're just saying you'll get the money in 3-4 weeks. So if it's a seller who's like really plans on moving out, they should be like, yeah, I don't care, but escrow can hold the money for $30,000 for an extra 30 days. Like that's not that big of a deal. But yeah, can you clarify that? So you're saying don't call it a security deposit. So that's where I was wrong. So or maybe we don't have to allow right now because we'll get back to everybody with that.
Well, I think what you're going to find out is some title companies don't like doing escrow holdbacks, and others will have their own forms. But again, if we're getting into delayed occupancy, I hope you've already sought out legal advice, and someone can kind of guide you through this. And I'm confident that anyone that takes this on would meet their ethical duties to be competent in their representation and know the difference in a security deposit and other funds. But basically, a security deposit is a refundable fee held in trust to secure performance under a lease agreement. And that's really not what we're talking about here. It could be, but without more. Sorry, what?
That's what I was thinking.
65B is in a lease agreement?
Right, but performing under the agreement would be like not trashing the house or not like or paying the rent. It doesn't really cover damages for holdover necessarily. And that's what this is. And you get into another thing, and this is really something for a lawyer to think about, is the concept of liquidated damages. So when damages are difficult to calculate, you have liquidated damages, and they're not supposed to be a penalty. Basically, if someone breaches a contract, they're not able to get a windfall. A really good example of this is if a tenant just moves out in the middle of the night and they have a year left on their lease, and the lease is, they have 10 months left on their lease, and the lease is $1,000 a month, and you're able to rent the property out in another month for $1,000. You don't get to sue your old tenant for $10,000 and get the rent, moving forward, because that's a windfall. So you have to sort of tailor these escrow holdbacks so they're not windfalls and punitive and they're enforceable. So that takes some thought. I don't think there's security deposits under 65 a year, just the general understanding of the security deposit.
So maybe let's table this conversation and say we'll get back to you guys with more information on that. But I think first and foremost, I'm going to get that CYA document out so that people can have that. And just going forward, if someone does want to use, if somebody does want to do delayed occupancy, just have your buyer not part of the offer, sign a separate thing that says that. But also, like, tell your buyer not to do it. I mean, that's not just like, yeah. I mean, I'm 100% going to be telling my buyers henceforward that, like, I know you love this home, but like, don't do it. There's going to be another home. Like, this is not worth the risk. So, anyways,
one of my favorite sayings is you can never get in trouble for saying no.
That was a good saying. Okay. Well, I think that's everything.
That's not everything, you
Oh,
goose.
that's not everything. That's right. That's right.
No, you're so crazy.
I know. I'm so crazy.
You know what 415 North 13th is?
Where's
I don't-
Rachel?
North 15.
It shows this building, supposed to do an inspection. Hold up this building.
Craig, do you mind taking me to the conference room because it is our building?
Okay.
Okay.
Not the address. So.
We'll wrap up by talking about the. Do you have the notes? Yeah, no worries.
I'll take your spot.
Okay, Rachel's gonna take over and finish this up.
Okay, so I'm just here to announce our $1 Million Club and who won Agent of the Month this month. So for $1 Million Club, I actually put in an order this month. So we have, congratulations are in order to Deanna Franklin, James Franklin, Kristen Young, Isaac Schaefer, Craig Tuttle, Holly Hutchins, Shannon Zimmerly, Anthony Venturi, Karen Morales, and Michelle Beatty. So good job, guys. Yay. Big marks for us. So good job to everyone that did that. And then Agent of the Month, we like to tell you, I mean, we tell you guys, like, it's not based on money. Like, that is not the only thing that we're looking at. But when an agent has just an outstanding month, we can't ignore it. And so this month's Agent of the Month is Deanna Franklin. So nice job, Deanna.
How much? What was her
She made over $5 million.
Sold over $5 million.
Sold over $5 million this month alone. So we couldn't ignore it. We had to give it to her. She just killed it this month. So congratulations, Deanna.
And the whole Franklin team.
And the whole Franklin team, y'all all made it. They're the top 3 in our $1 Million one. So
Awesome.
nice job,
Big
guys.
month for them. So thank you everyone for joining, and then we'll include the video from the Association of Realtors, and I'll include Seth's information. Again, if you have one of these situations, I highly recommend Seth.